Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 52 of Breaking Step. Cold hit Tibs as the world materialized around him. The wind pushed it in through the jacket he wore over his armor and the still unrepaired gaps in it. He imagined this was what it felt like to have ice unexpectedly, 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 unexpectedly. Yeah. Unexpectedly appear in your trouser. At least Jackal's reaction when Tibbs had made that happen matched what he felt. What this matched how this felt. The fighter might have become immune to Tibbs's kicking his shin, but he still felt cold. Of course, he hadn't considered how direct Jackal was in dealing with problems, so his solution to removing the ice had been to pull his trousers off. Tibbs had seen his friend without them often enough while they shared the room to be unbothered, but the rest of the inn hadn't. The ensuing commotion had been amusing to Jackal, but Krosef hadn't been pleased with Tibbs for causing it. Of course it's raining, the archer grumbled, looking around beyond the column. Unlike the platform in Craggle Rock, Mountain Sea, Kadilisian, as well as the other cities he traveled to in his search for where he'd been taken from, this platform had a roof connecting the pillars, keeping the rain from falling onto them. Come on, we need to get you an overcoat before this kills you. Considering the holes in the armor, that jacket isn't going to help. I'm fine, Tibbs replied sharply. He couldn't control the cold itself. It wasn't something linked to water, even if he could create it when he made ice. But he could use air to keep the wind from reaching him and making it worse. The cold that still made it through he dealt with by creating a layer of water between him and his armor and warming it with fire. You only think that, the man said, heading for the opening. The wind's going to force the rain in those holes, and you're going to get cold sick. Water is my element, he snapped, following him. The wind shoved them back as soon as they stepped into the rain, and the archer cursed. Well, I need something to keep the wind and water out. This could keep the men dry, and since he knew about air, even keep the wind from bothering him. But he didn't offer. Tibbs was in no mood to make the man's life easier after how hard he'd made Tibbs. He'd made on. Wow. Tibbs was in no mood to make the man's life easier after how hard he'd made it for Tibbs. No, he couldn't bring his team or even only Jackal. No, he couldn't delay so he could have a talk with Don. No, he couldn't tell anyone where they were going and why. It had almost been no to Tibbs getting his armor, but he'd made it clear he wasn't breaking into any building without his equipment. The archer had choice words when he saw the state of Tibbs's armor. 4 days hadn't been long enough to repair even half the damage it had suffered, but Tibbs felt better in it than even the armor he'd worn out of the dungeon. If nothing else, the hidden places that were repaired enough he could put fingers in still had their content. However the extra space worked, it had protected them. In the process of equipping himself, he distracted the archer enough to write a quick note for Jackal, then pass it to the rogue it signaled on the way in. As they exited, it was It had only it only had that he was leaving and with whom, since he knew nothing more, so the fighter wouldn't about worry worry about Tibbs vanishing. So, as far as Tibbs was concerned, the archer could freeze the entire time they were here, so long as he told them which building and where in it was the safe with the coins. The archer could catch the cold sickness and die of it. Maybe once he was no longer angry at the man, he'd feel different. The archer pulled Tibbs into the first building, which sold ponchos similar to the ones they'd bought to go up to go up the mountain in Mountain Sea. But instead of being thick wool, it was thinner and coated in beeswax. He put he put on the one the archer bought for him, and once outside, he barely had to use essence to keep the wind and water from bothering him. The archer still had to use a hand to keep the rain out of his eyes, but they moved faster. The area had the feel of marketplace, except that instead of only booths, permanent buildings also littered the area. They looked hastily put up, but still had a sense of permanence to them. Once they left the immediate area of the platform, the buildings were made of stone, but unlike Mountain Sea's large white stone or the gray ones of Cadalisian, Sayan, these came in varied colored and were roughly shaped, creating patterns as well as ample purchase for any enterprising rogue. The wide road had wagons and carts moving along it, much like Dungeonway did in Craggle Rock. Yeah, I will have to double check names because I'm pretty sure that one's wrong. In Craggle Rock, but this wasn't the largest of the road, so to the left had been one twice the width and seemed to be the main road to the platform. Horses, cows, and other animals Tibbs didn't know pulled them. Even Mountain Sea hadn't had so many of them. The backs were covered with cloth on which the water beaded the way it did on his poncho. He easily located the city guards. The armor was visible where the poncho ended, and it created distinctive shapes. The poncho also bore the armor's color, deep blue and yellow stripes. Some marched along the crowd, but most were in doorways or awning to keep the rain off, and only a few seemed to pay attention to the people. It reminded him a lot of other guards in the cities he'd visited, and he wondered if a city needed someone like Irdian, or to follow purity, for the guards to take their work seriously. The tavern they entered was warm, nearly stifling so when compared to outside. The room was large, with half the table occupied. Ponchos and overcoats were draped over any unused chairs, as well as the pegs along the wall. A fire roared in the fireplace, and the tables closer to it had more people around them. The woman behind the bar raised a hand in their direction, then closed her mouth on noticing Tibbs. It's good to see you're still around. Sorry. It's good to see you're still around, Archer, she finally said. The man glowed. The name glowed faintly. That's the name you're using? Tibbs asked, then realized he understood her, which meant she spoke Persetian. Had, had anyone else? He hadn't been paying attention. Were they in his kingdom? It's my name. More glowing words. No, it isn't. She was going to call you by your real name until she saw me. She looked at him in surprise, it wasn't that much of a reach. Tibbs didn't think they were special to each other, but they were friends, and had been it had been in her expression. It had been in how her expression brightened when she saw Archer. Why did you think I might not be around anymore? He asked her. Word is, you never reported in when your last job ended. That usually only means only mean one thing. He shook his head. It put me in a situation that's taking time to handle. I'm almost done. I'll report after that. It was fortunate that only Tibs saw the light on those words. Who's your friend? I'm not his, she asked. I'm not his friend, Tibs replied. I'm how he's handling. I'm how he's handling his problem. I'm Tibs. She looked at him. I'm Sanya. She filled 2 tankards from a barrel and placed them on the counter. To help with the cold, she told Tibbs before looking at the archer. Isn't he young for your kind of thing? I'm a runner, Tibbs said. The drink had little of what Tibbs had gotten to recognize as alcohol. To recognize as little as the drink had little of what Tibbs had gotten to recognize in alcoholic drinks, and what it had was thin, so he took a long swallow, only to choke on how spicy it was. Not used to Jurgen beer? She asked, chuckling. Archer snorted, sipping his. They don't need it where he's from. The weather's actually nice there. This felt his face heat up from the spices and possibly other stuff. Then that spread down his body, and he could see how it would feel good to someone who felt the cold from outside. He didn't take another sip. Ale was to quench his thirst, not what this one did. You're going to want your room? I thought you expected me to be dead, he replied with a smile. She shrugged. Business has been slow. Haven't needed all the rooms yet. Maybe they were special to each other, Tibbs decided. She fetched a key and handed it to him. It had no essence in it, a long shaft and teeth. He didn't see how many in the exchange. The room was on the 4th floor, Tibbs sensed, and listened as Archer unlocked it. No unexpected sound, essence, or motion within the lock. But that didn't mean it would be simple to pick. The room was not what Tibbs expected. It was larger than Krosef's, and like his, had a single bed wide enough for 2, if they were special or planned on enjoying each other. There was a red and black carpet on the floor next to it, a chest at its foot, and a shuttered window at its side. Next to that, a small table with a wash basin and pitcher, and on the opposite wall an unlit fireplace and a desk with locked drawers by the door. Everything had a layer of dust that spoke of months without being occupied. You shouldn't have given her your real name, Archer said. You don't trust her? He motioned to the room. Seems like you should if you live here. I don't live here. This is for when I work here. It explained the dust, but Tibbs had been sure the way they talked and looked at each other meant it was none of his business. Don't you have a house? I'd think a king would pay well enough to get one. If I had one, it wouldn't be anywhere near where I expect to work. A small smile for him. Might get one after this. Far from here. Why are we here? Why are we in here? Archer moved to the fireplace, which already had wood in it, and logs beside. Don't you want to rest before the work starts? Get dry? The striker caused the sparks to catch on the shaving. I am dry. I want this done with so I can go home. You rush into this and going back might not happen. Tibbs showed the bracelet around his wrist. He'd had to put it on for the attendant to agree to take them. When this turns red, I'm leaving. If the job's not done, I'll deal with the consequences and you'll have missed your chance your chance at all those coins you're after. Archer looked over his shoulder, his hand before the growing fire. How long until that happens? I don't know, Tibbs snapped. You wouldn't let me talk to anyone so I could find out. Not that anyone would have known, but it would have made passing along a message a lot easier than counting on coming across a rogue that would notice a signal. How long did it take last time? It's never the same. They have to have told you something, he insisted. Could be as long as months, as short as weeks. Weeks. More than one? Tibbs glared at him. I don't know. The man nodded and stood, the fire firmly caught. 2 weeks is ample time. I'd rather it take less, Tibbs said. It's going to take as long as it needs. I don't want this to fail because you're in a rush. Get used to it. I never go faster than I have to, but I don't sit around doing nothing when I can be working out how to get the job done. If you want to rest, tell me where the building is so I can see how I'll break into it. With a sigh, Archer stopped in the process of taking off his poncho. Come on, I'll show you. Tibbs was impressed. That looks like a battlement. Quigley had talked about them when recounting some of how he'd ended up in the catacombs before being sent to the dungeon. Tall stone walls with parapet and guards walking them all the time. Huh. Um, okay, so, well, I mean, this is what Quigley has said. Tibbs had, Tibbs had seen those on city walls in his travels and could imagine a castle having them. But this building was in the city itself. The wind had died as they walked, which made the rain less of a problem. The walk had felt like they crossed Craggle Rock, that's capitalized, 5 times, the large town, not what it was when it was only tents and a few buildings. He knew cities were big, but he wasn't sure he'd understood how big some could be. Mountain Sea hadn't felt this big. The buildings had changed as they crossed neighborhood. The quality of the work went up and down. The styles shifted. The quality had gone up steadily over the last blocks as had the attentiveness of the guards, Tibbs noticed, and how many people were hiding in the shadows. He occasionally sensed an adventurer, but by the concentration. The city didn't have a dungeon, so they'd be here as part of work for the guild or for themselves, maybe visiting or earning coins without the guild finding out. So long as they weren't here protecting what Tibbs was after, he didn't have to worry about them. The building was 6 stories and all stone. It was 2 floors taller than the surrounding buildings, while with the same kind of stonework. He'd be able to climb it, but the constant guards made doing so undetected difficult. He didn't have Kumdar's ease at using darkness to hide. Jumping to the roof meant crossing the large gap. Okay, you know what? The large plaza surrounding it. A strong deterrent against most, but Tibbs could do the jump easily, even if that would require a running start and avoiding the guard that were patrolling up there. Then there were the enchantments. He had no idea what the weaves did, only that there were a lot of them, or a complex one over the entire building. Okay. How or only Russian's house. Okay. Because in the next chapter, I established that the enchantment is weaker the higher up. Stronger. Stronger over the first 3 floors. It wasn't to the level of what protected the guild building, but the only place he'd encountered something similar was Sebastian's house in Craggle Rock. He'd been able to bring that down, so he could do that here. But if he brought down the whole thing if he brought the whole thing crashing down, he wouldn't be able to get the coins, and he didn't know if losing the building would be enough to stop the attempts against his town. What is this place? He asked, unable to hide his awe. It's called the brokerage. What do they break? Archer chuckled. Broker. For the right amount of money, they'll make things happen. They make things happen. If you need someone killed and don't have an assassin handy, you pay them and they'll find one. They also make sure the work gets done if you pay well enough. How much you give them determines the quality of the work. If you want something stolen, information gathered, or decimated, they are who you pay. Whatever you need done, they can do it for you. Tibs watched the guards patrolling the street. Why are city guards protecting them if they help crime happen? Are they corrupt? Not all of them, Archer said. Officially, the brokerage exists to help merchants establish contract with providers and buyers. They help the common folk find workers to repair their home. Nobles will use them to locate something they want and get it for them. Steal. Not always. It could be simply to buy it. But because they offer their service to everyone, it means a lot of those are the legal kind, and that offers them the luxury of helping criminals. They have so many coins, Tibs said, that everyone is afraid of what they'll do with them if they get angered. They're more afraid of what will happen if they suddenly cease to be. Sebastian's death is still causing chaos. No one wants to add to that. Is this Jackal's city? The archer didn't answer. You know I can just ask someone what city this is, right? He'd listened and had heard enough Persitian to be confident it was a common language here. Then I can ask Jackal if that's the city he's from. And what is it going to matter? Tibs considered it. Other than telling Jackal he'd been in his city, what was there to gain? That maybe they were from the same kingdom? Even if Jackal said they spoke Philinian where he was from? Tibs didn't know what that sounded like, so it could be one of the other language he'd heard here. I'd just like to know, he admitted. Shellbridge. The Archer answered with a sigh, and no, this isn't Jackal's city. How is Sebastian Death felt here, if it isn't his city? Did Jackal tell you his father only controlled one city? Tibs nodded and worried Jackal had lied to him. He didn't have light when they talked about it. I'm not surprised. That boy worked too hard at not knowing anything about what his father did. Even if Sebastian's operation were limited to that city, his death would be felt elsewhere because that city is important to other places. No city exists alone. But Sebastian's criminal reach was so wide, he had an effect on your town long before he set foot there, because Harry and Jackal were there. Tibs stated, no, because there was something there he wanted, and the thing in question happened to be his son just made him put more people on it. The thing to keep in mind is that if there was something Sebastian wanted, he reached for it. And Sebastian wanted a great many things. Can we go inside the building? Not without a good reason. You don't think wanting to know where they keep your coin is good enough? Archer smiled. I might, but they certainly won't. And that concludes chapter 52 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to know, if you want to read the story, you can do that on Royal Road for free. If you want to read ahead of Royal Road and support me in the process, you can do that on my Patreon. And if you're looking, and if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.